My idea for the EU LCS might seem like fantasy because at the moment it exists only in my mind as a hypothetical. But Riot Games can make it a reality. Just as at esports pools, you can play fantasy tournaments there, but win real money. If you really think, things that only a true fantasist could imagine, like Wild Turtle's actually good, Mike Young actually is just the second coming of Dandy, apparently Doublelift's reality in any way matches up with his own perception of himself in his mind, then you can make these picks in their fantasy contests for the LCS, NA and EU. I mean, obviously NA only for those ones, because who gives a fuck about EU, right? And you could potentially win. Just as if you want to go a step up, you can even go ahead and bet on it. Like if you want to bet on who will win the upcoming telecom war of SK Telecom versus KT Rolster, they've got the odds up there. You can place a bet now, assuming you're in the right country. Offer may not apply in Connecticut or whatever, and do therefore. So the NALCS being franchised has been a big deal for global League of Legends in many respects, because first of all, it puts it on par with the trajectory of what's going on with the Overwatch League, where people are buying it for 20, 30 million, and people are trying to make this global league and get the broadcasting rights there. It's given LCS its own foothold within that new world that everyone wants to get into in esports in terms of the industry. But the problem is, it left the immediate question of what happens to Europe, though. What happens to the EU LCS? And so a story came out on ESPN, reported by Jacob Wolf, that 4 EU LCS teams have applied to be part of the NA LCS and part of that franchising model. Those 4 teams being G2 Esports, champions of the last few splits, Fnatic, obviously a legendary team with many titles in history in EU LCS, Splice, one of the newer teams, but a team that went to Worlds, and Misfits, one of the best new teams for the LCS. And we're talking about a general elite level teams or organizations that certainly have good finances behind them and a good pedigree within the league for either the last couple of years or for the history of the league. Now, this in itself is interesting just for those teams wanting to be part of an LCS. Now, what is the reason why? Well, this franchise model can and almost certainly will work in NA. The reason why the owners are willing to pay the 10 million, etc., is because of the way it's staggered out over a few years, and they already have assurances, I've heard from my sources, in terms of what deals Riot already has in place and what they have on the horizon, that will make it well worth it in terms of revenue for everyone, and will mean that this will be a better scenario in terms of the business of the league in general for those teams going forward. So it's no surprise that people in NA want to be involved in it, but also people in EU want to be involved in it, because there's no indication so far that EU will get anything of that sort. So the model already can and most likely will work in NA. And in NA, they'd already reached the point where they'd almost saturated the business possibilities from what currently the NALCS is. The big players in NA, people like TSM, Cloud9, Team Liquid, had already done a fantastic job exploiting what was available in terms of the industry opportunities and outside sponsorship opportunities. There weren't really that many extra areas they could go to get more revenue. So franchising the LCS allows them now more room, more wiggle room, more area from which to play with, and in theory, higher metrics across the league from which to attract more sponsorship and to make direct revenue and to get business interests involved via broadcasting rights and to make money that way and to grow their businesses. The problem is, over in Europe, they were nowhere near saturating the point of having massive viewership, great financials, amazing sponsorships to the same degree that those North American teams were anyway. Now, some of those factors to do with things like regional aspects of marketing budgets, etc., but also I don't think it was ever going to be possible to overcome the viewership gap, because Europe is almost never going to get the same amount of NA viewers as NA gets of European viewers, just because of the time zones and how they work out, and the fact gamers stay up late and they're not going to be around during the school and daytime if they're in NA to watch EU in general. So I don't think they could have overcome the popularity gap anyway for those. So EU teams, top EU teams, apply to be part of the NALCS. First and foremost, that just shows how flawed the EU LCS is, that they'd be willing to give up things or be willing to have to totally relocate and invest in a new zone, a new region, and we're talking about elite level teams from Europe, despite the fact that they could stay in Europe and be the best and dominate there and succeed there. So it shows you that they're essentially saying with this move, it's better to be in the NALCS as anyone than it is to be the very best in Europe, which is what they currently have kind of locked up. Now, you could make the case that this is some kind of a protest move, that they only did these applications to kind of make it known publicly and to Riot that, like, you know, the EULCS is not in a good enough place right now. You can't just take care of NA. You've got to do something for Europe because we need more in order to make our business better and for us to progress. And the current situation is too stagnant. It's too stale. We can't do much with it. But within the report, they at least claimed that this wasn't some kind of group application, that they weren't doing this as some sort of special pressuring method to get leverage over Riot and at least publicly leverage the public opinion against them. With all that said, as we discussed in the Esports Salon episode about franchising, where Ocelot appeared and the concept of moving them over, it's certainly something that the European teams want. It's certainly something they think is of value. Now, yes, there would be certainly a very difficult aspect if they were to have to drop their lineups and take maximum 2 European players over to go and play in the NA LCS. I mean, for a start off, a team like G2, that would obviously be a massive issue, right? Because if they want to take 2 players, what, are they only going to take 1 European and take Perks and Trick? Are they going to just drop all the other good players? They've got a fantastic bot lane. There's already obvious massive problems. Now, personally, I think there's ways around that. I think they should just make NA LCS so that the West is all one region, and in theory, you can import from anywhere, because there aren't that many advantages to a European player over a North American anyway, so I think it's kind of a moot point in that particular sense, and I think then just make it so that import is like Korean, Chinese, etc. I don't think everyone will just import Europeans. I think the extra costs of it all and the cultural differences and the fact that you'll have to move to North America to live, I think actually would even it out and give NA talent a very good chance. But that's neither here nor there. That is a side point, a different concept that I came up with. Now, here's the thing. Regardless of what they're going to do in this particular sense, if they're going to accept these teams, I think the solution, personally, like, I would actually like it if Riot did let those European teams in, whether that's let them in with their full lineups, like I said here, and just make it so that all Westerners are counted as native and have NA LCS be the big LCS league, or whether they just let them in and say you have to make a totally new roster. I would like them, since they have shown no indication they're going to franchise the EU LCS, to actually make it so NA LCS is their main focus, it is the franchised one, and don't keep doing the EU LCS concept in Europe, because it hasn't gotten past a certain point. It is massively saturated, it's hit its threshold, and you can't really go any further, and it's still nowhere near where NA LCS was. So I think the solution should be have NA LCS be LCS style and just make Europe an open zone. Make it like the open circuit of games like Dota 2, like CSGO. I mean, admittedly, Dota 2 is kind of becoming a little bit restrictive itself in terms of Valve taking more control, but have it be this open circuit in Europe and have NALCS be the one that's the LCS approach. I'd like it because the LCS approach hasn't really worked in Europe. European esports hasn't embraced it as much. NA doesn't have as much interest in Europe. The new money in European esports goes into CSGO. It goes into teams like North. It goes into Astralis, Heroic, Godsense. We're talking about the refresh companies getting millions and millions and investing in massive salaries and massive investment in those teams. We've got the ES Force teams. We've got the likes of Virtus Pro, Navi. They're getting massive investment in them. SK Gaming. So the new money in Europe doesn't go into LCS teams in general anyway over there. It goes into CSGO. But if you give EU an open circuit and just have, say, at the end of the year, a tournament rather, that qualifies you to Worlds, so people can qualify for this either through circuit points from the other tournaments, which Riot can decide, or you just have one big tournament that everyone can attend and qualify for, and then the top 3 teams from that go to Worlds. I think this would be a great approach to allowing Europe to grow in its own way, because it hasn't really grown within the LCS model in the way that it could have done. And the fact that CSGO is ahead of it overall, I think is a problem when you look at European esports at the moment, when you're considering the League of Legends perspective. If you make it an open circuit so that anyone can run tournaments and that it's, again, not Riot hands-on deciding what tournaments exist, then you can bring back in some of the people that have already run League of Legends in history. DreamHack, ESL, they can come back in and start running tournaments, and they likely would if the space was there and they were able to run these competitions with top European talent. Then you can get some of the newer people that haven't necessarily been involved because they were during the LCS era that also would hop in. People like StarLadder from Eastern Europe. League of Legends is still a massively popular game over there. Epicenter, also a newer company from the ES Force people coming out in Europe, did a big CSGO event in the, I think it was like October last year. You'd have Faceit, who obviously run League of Legends and have wanted to be involved from very early on, but they were around in the LCS era. These people would very likely run competitions and run LANs and have its own unique circuit. And that's the thing. The viewership would have a chance to get bigger, but in a different sense, because one-off tournaments like that have their own hype. They have their own unique appeal and will get eyes from the West so we're talking about North America here, that wouldn't watch EU LCS week to week to week as a league. They don't care about the storylines, the hours are too bad. But if it's on a weekend and it's a weekend tournament like the old school 2-day LANs, like a DreamHack, and people in America are like, oh, well, there's not much going on during the day. Oh, I'll watch that. I've got the weekend off. Now I think is where you could actually start to get bigger viewership in Europe to get close to where NA is and much higher than EU LCS is right now. In terms of finances as well, I think the open circuit could really help European League of Legends. It'd bring back some of that money that at the moment just goes over to CSGO, where, by the way, they don't get much of a return on that and won't for years. Difference is, they actually now might be able to get some sort of a direct return in terms of they'll get a lot of eyeballs on the product that they might not necessarily get as much of in Counter-Strike, especially because Counter-Strike's more of a global game. It's not really set in just the regions in that sense. I don't mean global game in terms of China, etc. I mean in terms of tournaments feature teams from NA and Europe, whereas this will be just European teams. Then you've got to look at the fact that it will bring back those tournament organizers. They'll be a part of it. They'll blow up League of Legends in Europe. And so you'll have very different approaches, but you'll have different types of success, and European League of Legends can become vibrant again. I also think this would contrast well with the Overwatch League, because in the Overwatch League, supposedly, they're going to have the Overwatch League part of the year. The rest of the year is going to be an open circuit. Now, I realize this is different because it's not like you've got the LCS period and then an open circuit. This is like you've got an open circuit and LCS running parallel. So it's more of a hybrid approach, but I also think that's what would be intelligent. It's a different approach to a different game and different ecosystems. Finally, I think it would give Europe its own kind of intuitive logic for existing, its own benefits that it doesn't have, contrasted with NA at the moment, where it doesn't really have any benefits over them, except for having better teams in theory. So first and foremost, if Europe is an open circuit like that, now you can even have NA players, if they're good but can't get into LCS in those limited spots. You can have talents who go to Europe to prove themselves. It'd have an open circuit, so in theory it's easy to break through. You can just be a team that goes to this tournament, does well, but wouldn't have qualified for the LCS or couldn't have gone through the 3-month slog of getting there. But now you have one-off tournament where you do well and show you've got some potential and maybe get the attention of a team in NA LCS or a team in EU or wherever it might be. It's a way where people, because they're playing real tournaments, can show how good they are under pressure and on proper match play, not just league play, week to week to week, day to day to day. You can also test out talent. You can take some talent to one event in Europe, try them out there, see how they do, without committing to a full split with them. And without committing in as much as, yeah, you don't have to play with that guy who you've signed for your team, but there's not the option to sign other people because there's a league going on where everyone else's roster look. Now you can also look elsewhere and you can have options for better players. So I think it would give Europe its own logical and different way of existing and kind of justifying itself that at the moment it doesn't, as just a poor man's version of NA LCS, and with NA LCS about to go franchised, almost just a side irrelevant region that doesn't mean a whole lot, because in the context of the West, it's not going to have any of these upside that the franchising is going to bring overall, and right at the moment seems to be treating Europe like that red-headed stepchild that they don't really care about as much as their favoured son of NA.
Welcome to Thorns and Thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't have any content. The man already speaks his mind, but I ain't gonna stop you now. I assume you saw a pretty fucking good video, all right? And you're already on the man's channel, so stay a little while longer. I see you're comfortable, and just check a few more out.